Today, I'm going to be talking about how to reinvent yourself. I'm going to first go into my personal experience with it, and then I'm going to talk about what it really means and what it takes to reinvent yourself, and how to do it with the least amount of pain possible. The thumbnail of this video does not deceive your eyes. It's very easy to reinvent yourself, but it hurts. It doesn't hurt physically, it hurts mentally, honestly. So, to get into my personal experience with this, I've had to reinvent myself a couple times, and that's a very normal occurrence. People reinvent themselves all the time. You have to. It's not sustainable to be the same person from birth to death. You need to change. Situations change, people change, experiences change, and sometimes your wants and needs, they all change with what you think you should be trying to achieve. So, my first real experience with this was when I started my first business. I was a sneaker reseller. And that's how I identified. I identified myself as a sneaker reseller. I also had a full-time job, but then I kind of didn't really want to keep pursuing the business. So everyone who I'd really told I was a sneaker reseller, I was only a sneaker reseller to them for the time being, but eventually I did change. I wanted to do other things. I was a bartender, and then I subsequently did serving as well. I did a few things in hospitality, and I no longer identified with being a reseller anymore. And a couple things came with that. After I no longer identified with that, I kind of felt like it was of my own decision, but also, I mean, it wasn't going amazing. I wasn't a millionaire, a multimillionaire off of reselling shoes. So it kind of felt like the people around me who kind of didn't really believe in me, it kind of felt like they were right to a certain extent. And that sucked, It just felt like I had to kind of admit defeat to people who clearly were wrong, I was successful. I did make money. I did do what I say I was going to do. And I kind of had to let go of that idea, that sentiment that, I'm not this person forever. So then I changed. And then I did real estate, and then again, you change your identity. But I figured out after doing this process a couple times that there's a way to do it to actually help you rather than just having to suffer through it every time. There's a certain way you can go about reinventing yourself. And I'm going to talk about the actual methods that helped me personally. So, first of all, the best way to make it easier is to identify and dismantle your ego. Let's get into that first part, identifying your ego. Your ego is basically just what you think you are, who you think you are. However you perceive yourself, that is your ego, that is your identity. That is who you are to you. And that's often the hardest thing to break for some people. If you've been a plumber for 20 years, that's who you are to other people. That's who you are to yourself. If you've been a businessman, a successful businessman, that's who you are. And to go from being a successful businessman to now, again, a student like you were in your youth, it feels like a huge step down. And honestly, it is a step down. And you just need to accept that. What a lot of people don't do is they don't take it well. And how do you take something like that well? I mean, being completely honest, no one's going to be like, oh, I'm finally a student again. That's amazing. I get to learn, and I get to not earn any money, and I get to listen to other people who I've lived longer than, and I have more experience than. That sucks. That's not good for anybody. That doesn't feel good to anybody. But you need to identify it. You need to see, where is that self-centeredness? Where is that confidence? Where does that ego stem from? Then you need to dismantle it. You don't need to dismantle it to the point to where you are just now used and abused by people. That's not the situation. That's not the case. But you need to dismantle it because it's going to inhibit your ability to learn. It's not going to help you learn. It's going to hurt your learning curve. It's going to make you stagnate. It's going to make you think you know more than you do and you have more experience than you do. And that's not going to help. To listen to somebody who's younger than you tell you what to do, that hurts. That doesn't feel good. That feels horrible. And to have someone who you feel is dumber than you listening to them, that that doesn't feel any better, you know? But you need to let go of this idea. And once you finally do let go of that idea, once you do let go of the idea that you are who you think you are versus who you are, what you actually are, then you can get into the next step, which is humility. Humility is probably the biggest factor when it comes to learning. Because if you can acknowledge that you don't know everything and that there are people around you who know more than you and are trying to help you, and you accept that help, you'll grow much quicker. Oftentimes, humility comes with kind of shame, especially if you're a bit older or a bit more experienced. You can kind of associate humility with shame, even though there's no shame in learning a new skill. It's just the way we perceive things. We don't like being new. We don't like being judged for not being perfect, you know? So that's step number 2. And oftentimes the first 2 steps are the hardest ones. People, they get frustrated and they just quit. They're just like, no, this isn't for me. Let me give you a situation for a man who is unhappy in his life. He hasn't been happy in a long time. He hasn't been content with what he's done. And he brags to everyone that I've been the same. I've never switched up. I've always been who I am. If he's unhappy in his life, then he's obviously never reinvented himself. And he's proud of that. But to not be happy and to never reinvent yourself, that's not something to be proud of. That's not an achievement. That is stubbornness. That is lack of growth. He's never grown. And that could very easily be you if you're that resilient to change, that resilient to growth, that hard-headed to think that you don't have to change. You never have to change. You always know what's best. You know what to do at all times, and no one can tell you any different. That is stubbornness. That's arrogance. And that will oftentimes lead you to a path of great, great unfulfillment. And this is the reality for a lot of older people who just refuse to change and refuse to see life for what it really is sometimes, you know? And sometimes we pity these people. They don't want our pity, but that's what they get. And when they do make a change, they oftentimes don't fully recognize all of what they have to do and how they have to feel about making these changes. The last thing I'm going to say is being resilient. Now, this is obvious. Everyone always thinks, okay, it's easy to just push through. It's easy to do this. It's easy just to keep going. It's not. It's the hardest thing, to keep going. It's not the most challenging part, but it's the hardest one, because consistency is not easy to do when you've never practiced a certain skill, especially a new skill you're not accustomed to learning. So you're going to have to be resilient. You're going to need to understand, yes, there's going to be a huge, huge learning curve, and you're not going to be successful right away. Now, there is a limit to this. If you've been doing something for 3 years and you were supposed to be successful 2 years ago, you're either not learning correctly, you're not changing what you're doing, and you're not seeking progress. These are usually where people get stuck, and this is where they get so frustrated that they give up and then they never try anything again. But being resilient, I'm not talking about just not progressing. Being resilient to the social stigma that comes with this change, the social stigma that's going to come with changing and reinventing yourself in general. It's never going to be easy for anybody. It just won't. It's just not going to be easy for anyone. And people are going to judge you. And being judged by people is usually the hardest part. Because now people have to see you in the state of, it almost feels like you've just hatched out of a shell, you know? Like you're fresh. You have no idea what you're doing. You're now learning. You're now in a vulnerable position. And that's hard for most people to accept. But once you do accept these things and you do actually implement all of these ideas, it's easier when you're younger, it gets more difficult when you're older. But once you implement these ideas, then you'll be able to grow efficiently, effectively, and more importantly, quickly. And you'll be able to do it without fear of ostracization from your community, or kind of just the embarrassment of having to do something new and try something because everyone else is just too afraid. That's pretty much it. You like what you saw, subscribe, and thanks.